Welcome to our presentation about secondary succession in Point Pleasant Park after the significant disturbance of Hurricane Juan in 2003. Point Pleasant Park is a loved and well-used 75-hectare urban forest located on the southern Halifax Peninsula. It provides accessible trails and nature access to much of Halifax and encourages increased biodiversity, contributing to an overall healthy ecosystem. Before being used by the British as a site to guard entrance to the Halifax Harbour, the land played a significant role for the local Mi'kmaq people as a spiritual place. Following the first full moon of spring, or the frog croaking month, the Mi'kmaq people would gather for 7 days in this sacred place, which still holds much significance for the Mi'kmaq people to this day. On September 29, 2003, Hurricane Juan hit Nova Scotia, causing devastating damage throughout the Halifax region, including Point Pleasant Park. With sustained winds of 151 kilometers per hour, Hurricane Juan is recorded as the most destructive storm since 1893. Despite the extensive root system of the even-aged old-growth forest, the shallow soil paired with the lack of buffer from the heavy storm winds due to an even age and size of the forest caused more than 80,000 trees to fall, extensively changing the ecological forest community of the park. This significant disturbance marks the beginning of secondary succession in Point Pleasant Park. There are a few key terms to define before discussing the collected data. Secondary succession is the slow change in a community following a disturbance that does not remove or change the soil in a given area. Climax community refers to the end point of succession. This is a stable community in equilibrium with its environment with little to no ecological changes. Density of species is used to describe the number of target species in a given area. Richness refers to the number of species and their relative abundance, and evenness refers to the distribution of species within a given boundary. The objectives of this study are to gather information about the overall change in the forest community over time and understand how the forest will change as secondary succession continues towards its climax community by observing multiple community metrics of both the whole forest and individual species. In our case, we are studying the red maple, Acer rubrum, and red spruce, Piscia rubens. We hypothesize that over time, following the disturbance, the new dominant species will continue to grow and dominate the community. Along with this, both the forest density and species richness will also increase as more species regenerate and the forest moves towards a community climax. As the climax is reached, growth and richness will begin to taper out as the community begins to stabilize.
To conduct this research, data was collected by Biology 2060 students annually in October from 2004 to 2023. Due to unforeseen circumstances, data was unable to be collected in the years 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2020. A total of 6 20-meter by 20-meter sites were chosen to collect data from, which are represented by the colorful squares in the image on this slide. With the help of a field guide, students were able to collect information on the density of red maples, the density of red spruces, the total density of trees, as well as the species richness at each site. The obtained data was then analyzed using linear regression because this type of test is used to determine the relationship between an independent variable, such as the year, and a dependent variable, such as a species density.
To assess the overall change of the forest community over time, we can observe the effect of time in years on the total density of species in Point Pleasant Park, shown in Figure 3. The total species density has increased in the years following the Hurricane Juan disturbance, demonstrated by the total density averaged over the 4 sites measured in 2023 being approximately 43 times larger than the total average density in 2004. There is a positive relationship between time and species density, indicating that as time goes on, the species density increases. The storm knocked down much of the large, even-aged forest that would have previously been shading much of the forest, allowing much more light and other resources to be readily available for other species to begin secondary succession, leading to a decrease in competition for resources. Species that are less shade tolerant would be able to establish some space in the forest and use the readily available sunlight and other resources they may need to regenerate. The destruction of the forest by the storm could have had other influences on the nutrient density of the soil by decomposing debris from the storm and temperature and humidity levels. We can also infer that around 2015 there was some human interference such as planting of species as the number of species in certain sites dramatically increases. Due to an availability of resources and inferred human intervention, the total density of species in Point Pleasant Park was able to steadily increase as secondary succession was underway. As the environment reaches its community climax, the total species density will stabilize as a steady state of dominant and established species use up resources that will no longer be available for new or unestablished species to utilize. This will cause the total species density to reach a stable, steady point at community climax. In order to compare specific species densities and the changes of both the red maple and the red spruce individually over time, a linear regression analysis was used. To determine their dominance throughout secondary succession and better understand the forest dynamics throughout succession, we must first observe the changes of each species separately. Figure 4.1 shows an increasing growth rate of the density of red maple, the dominant species in 2023, indicated by a positive slope of 2.95 and displays a weak relationship between the species density and time, demonstrating the species recovery and dominance over the succession period since the disturbance of Hurricane Juan in 2004. We can reject the null hypothesis of no change over time and conclude that there is an increase in red maple density over time. The number of red spruce trees were counted at the sites in Point Pleasant Park to determine how the density has changed since the Hurricane Juan disturbance. This data is represented in Figure 4.2, which illustrates a weak relationship between species density and time and displays the density of red spruce trees increasing by approximately 0.32 trees per site each year from 2004 to 2003. We can reject the null hypothesis of no change over time and conclude that there is an increase in red spruce density over time.
Overall, we observe that there is an increase in the species density value of both the red maple and the red spruce from 2004 to 2023. Initially, the red spruce prevailed as the dominant species and no red maples were found at any of the sites. However, there has been a significantly higher growth rate of red maple since Hurricane Juan, which has resulted in it becoming the dominant species to date in 2023. So why has the dominant species changed during this period of secondary succession? One possible reason to explain this outcome is that there was an external human influence on this ecosystem. Particularly, it is possible that some red maple trees were planted at one of the sites between the 2008 and 2009 collection dates, as one site was found to have 42 trees in 2009 in comparison to the total of 0 red maple trees that were found at the sites in 2008. Another reason why the red maple is currently dominating is that it is a highly adaptable, generalist species. It can successfully grow in different soil types, light conditions, and grows very quickly compared to a species like the red spruce, which is a late successional species. If no further disturbances are to occur, the red maple will continue to be the dominant species as the forest progresses through the stages of succession. Once the late successional stage is reached, the population of red maples will begin to stabilize and stop increasing. To determine the species richness of Point Pleasant Park, ecology students visited the park each October and counted the number of species present at each site. This data is represented by Figure 6. Overall, this figure illustrates that the species richness value of Point Pleasant Park has increased by approximately 0.6 new species each year from 2004 to 2023. So why did the species richness value increase from 2.5 to 10.5 on average from 2004 to 2023? In the early stages of succession, species may have moved to the sites of interest since they had much more room to accommodate new species after the hurricane. According to one study, species richness can even increase during the later stages of succession because the old growth forest species grow more quickly than the early successional species are lost. Additionally, just as with the density of the red maple, it is also possible that the species richness increased at the sites because members of the public planted new species to accelerate the succession process. So, as the forest approaches its climax community, we believe that the species richness will continue to increase as the older growth thrives and as new growth moves in. Based on the research that we have conducted on succession dynamics, we believe that the Acadian forest in Point Pleasant Park is currently in the early successional stage. We reached this conclusion using two key findings. First, as we could see earlier in Figure 5, the process of succession for an Acadian forest can take several decades to occur. So, it is unlikely that Point Pleasant Park is in the late successional stage after just 19 years since the hurricane. Second, the total density, the species richness, as well as the densities of the red spruce and red maple continue to increase each year, indicating that the park is not near its climax community. Ultimately, there are two reasons why the succession of Point Pleasant Park may differ from what we would expect to occur in nature. Firstly, the development of human infrastructure can destroy existing habitats, a phenomenon known as habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation can influence succession as there are fewer nearby habitats for species to migrate from, making it difficult for new species to emerge after natural disasters. Secondly, since the park is in a popular urban area, members of the public or scientific community can impact the process of succession by adding flora. We believe that this occurred in 2009 when there was a spike in the density of red maple trees. To help the forest return to its climax community, we can utilize a principle of the Mi'kmaq Nation known as two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing refers to the skill of integrating the strengths of indigenous and Western philosophies into one's work. One example of an indigenous philosophy that we can integrate into the recovery of Point Pleasant Park is how we view the land. In indigenous culture, the land is viewed as something that we are privileged to have and take care of, not something that we can own.
If human interference hadn't occurred in regards to the planting of the red maple trees, do you still believe that red maple would still be the dominant species in the forest? Because of its quick growth and generalist condition tolerances, the red maple had the chance to dominate the newly opened space after the disturbance. It is a fast-growing tree and has the ability to germinate faster than the red spruce, allowing it to disperse more successfully when there is available space and resources. According to the USDA, the red spruce takes about 30 years to begin to see steady seed production, as opposed to the red maple, which has minimal germination requirements and begins seed dispersal much earlier. Until the forest hits its late successional stages, closer to its community climax, I believe the red maple would still be the dominant species in the forest today, regardless of previous human interference, albeit at a slower overall dispersal rate.
During our research, we were unable to find any previous studies regarding the effects of humans adding plants during succession. However, we did find some research that could be used to indirectly answer this question. For example, one article noted that a higher dispersal rate of seeds increases the rate of succession. From this finding, we can infer that the rate of succession also increases if humans add plants to a rebounding forest, allowing the forest to complete the successional stages more quickly. Based on what we have learned in lecture, we believe that a faster rate of succession would behave similar to a population with a high growth rate that overshoots its carrying capacity. Therefore, by that logic, adding plants during succession may actually increase the amount of time that it takes for a population to reach its carrying capacity. However, further studies should be conducted in this area to confirm this hypothesis. If a similar disturbance were to occur at Point Pleasant Park in its current successional stage, most, if not all, of the red maples would be eliminated once again. Since the red spruce is not the tallest or most abundant species currently, we believe that it will be less impacted by the effects of another hurricane. Therefore, there should be more red spruce trees present if a similar disturbance were to occur. If no trees were to be added during succession this time, the populations of red spruces and red maples would look quite different 19 years later than they currently do. In this scenario, we believe that the red spruce would arise as the dominant species in Point Pleasant Park because it got a head start over the red maple.
We would like to thank Christine Beauchamp for the creation of this project, Dr. Allison Schmidt for her preparing the data to be used and interpreted, including the statistical analysis, graphs, and data organization, and the students of Biology 2060 at Dalhousie University for the collection of data. We would also like to thank the teaching assistants and all others involved in the rigorous and ongoing collection of data to help progress and deepen our understanding of the land and its recovery. We also thank the Mi'kmaq people for their sharing of land and acknowledge that we work and play on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. Thank you.
And here are our references. Thank you for listening.